We do have a very, very special vehicle on stage with us, and it has such an incredible story, which I've been told we've got plenty of behind the scenes and things that you may not have heard before, because we are harking back to 1991 and 1992, where Godzilla, the Nissan GTR, was unleashed, and there is some incredible stories about its victory at the Bathurst 1000. So, the person to tell us said back behind the scenes stories is the one and only Alan Heaphy. Put your hands together, everyone. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's begin, because if anyone recognises this car, I think one thing is going to come to mind, isn't it? And that one moment that involved a certain Jim Richards. But what we'll do is we'll talk about both victories. So we'll talk about the win in 1991, and then we'll talk about Mark Scaife and Jim Richards in 1992. But let's get to know you as well a little bit first. So how are you connected to this car?
Well, I have a long history with Nissan Motor Company and Motorsport. I spent a considerable amount of years in Europe where we run prototype programs, and that's Group C, like the Porsche 962s you can see over there in the Marquees at the moment. Ran that program for a couple of years, and then that program shut down, and I got seconded really back here to the boys in Australia, because they had just got what we call the RX program, which was the Godzilla, and we in England we had quite a bit of data acquisition ability, which we were able to bring over and put onto that car. So that was the end of 1990. We were able to escalate the development of that car, I mean, in a couple of months, which would normally take a couple of years, with just to be able to read and get all the information out of the car. So that was a plan. And then the 1991 series with the two cars, the first race we had at Sandown in 1991 was... I had to call Jim Richards up and say, hey, mate, slow down, you know, we're going too fast, we're too far in front of the field. And Jim's comment to me was, mate, if I've got to slow down anymore, I'm going to crash. So it was a bit of a problem. But the whole idea of 1991 was to, yes, win the Australian Touring Car Championship, but Bathurst was the trophy. That's what we're after to get. And a couple of things about the car. When Mark Scaife qualified the car in the qualifying of Bathurst 1991, the car did 293 kilometres an hour down the Conrod Straight, and that figure was only not so long ago kept up with the V8 supercars. So the cars themselves were incredible bits of equipment. I mean, far advanced from anything that we're running in most of the world. So a very, very good car. But the whole thing was the team behind it. I mean, the boys at Gibson Motorsport, out of all the teams I work with around the world, they were by far the most competent group of guys that I've ever worked with. So it was a good thing, and they'd built a beautiful car.
Wow. Tell us that speed again. So 1991, it went how fast down Conrod?
293 kilometres an hour.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a good weekend. We qualified all practice sessions. We topped the timesheet. We qualified pole position, and we won the race.
So now take us to 1992, and anyone who remembers Bathurst, I can see a couple of guys laughing in the front row. You know what happened in 1992, Bathurst 1000. For anyone who doesn't know, Jim Richards and Mark Scaife won the Bathurst 1000, and then there was a very interesting comment made on the podium. He said, "You're a pack of arseholes," to everyone on top of the podium. And it is one of the moments in history. And people are filming me on their phones, so I'll probably go down in history as I've just bloody said it. But there we go. It's all history. And, of course, it's a very pivotal moment in Bathurst history. So, Alan, talk us through 1992 Bathurst 1000.
Well, it started off a dry race, and then they had a hell of a downpour. And we got one car in to get wets on.
Just a little bit closer for me. So
we got one car in to put a set of wets on, and Jim was sort of left out in the cold a bit. But and then by the time he got almost to where we had to go, to the top of the hill, then there was a huge downpour. There was a flooded road. he aquaplaned, went into the bank along with about 3 or 4 other cars, and that was the end of the race. But the weather was so bad that the organisers red flagged the race. And the rules of engagement are that if the race is red flagged, it goes back 1 lap, and whoever was leading the race at that time, then they win the race. Well, when it was red flagged, Dick was leading the race, but when you go back 1 lap, he wasn't. Mark and Jim were. And to say that Nissan wasn't over popular with the Ford and the Holden fans, as you can guess, but and when I got to the podium, they got the presentations. Well, and the fans weren't overly excited about the fact that they'd won, and
they made it very well known, didn't they, Alan?
Yeah, they really did. And Jim made his point very clearly what he thought of him.
Yeah,
which was pack of arseholes, yes. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, and then you know, the 1992 was a good a year as 91. I mean, the car was so far advanced that to everything that was locally built, or the Sierras or the BMWs, then it was just a matter of doing 92 the same as we did 91, and that's what happened.
So talk to us, what sort of happened after 92? Talk to us about, I guess, going through sort of the looking at the car and obviously the car's history after that.
Well, the end of 92 was the end of Group A, which is what this category was, and then we all moved into the Australian rules of regulation, if you like, which was the V8 Commodores, V8 Falcons and all that sort of stuff. So they went on to, and the Gibson Motorsport people took on Commodores, and they sort of were successful on those for the first years, but and while the cigarette money was there, then everything was kosher. But once the cigarette money got banned, then, I mean, a lot of people suffered badly through lack of budget to be able to go and do the racing they wanted to do.
Yeah, I do hear, by no means am I endorsing cigarette sponsorship, but I do hear about said glory days back in the day of that sponsorship.
Yeah, look, I mean, it was incredible the amount of money that you know, the cigarette companies were prepared to throw around, as you probably see in some of the Formula One cars back in those days. I mean, you need 500 or 600 million to run a Formula One car back in those days, and they were happy to write the cheques out. So it was good for us for a while as well.
Absolutely. Now, talk to us about, to you, why is this car important to be a part of its future now, and to show it to people at the Adelaide Motorsport Festival and at other events?
Well, there were 5 cars built, only ever 5 of these cars. The first car was destroyed here by Mark in a crash in the Adelaide Grand Prix in 1990, and then there were 4 others built after that. And the cars, the first car that was built had a lot of Japanese race car components in it, whereas the second, third and fourth cars were all locally product. So the wheels, all the suspension uprights and linkages and all those bits were all made. I mean, the wheels were made here in Adelaide, so were the suspension components, a lot of the parts, and then the rest of it was made all in-house. We had the machinery equipment, the engineering, the capabilities to make the wheel nuts, the spindles, I mean, everything you could think of. And the people we had in the engine shop were exceptional. They really were. And they were getting 700 horsepower out of one of these things without too much hassle at all. But we raced them at around about 680, and that was reliable. Well, at the end of 91, because we'd been so dominant, Australian Motorsport, or CAMS as we knew them then, said, right, guys, you ain't going to keep going. So they put a pop-off valve on the car, which was a boost control valve. And that took a good 100 horsepower out of what we had. But the ingenuity of the people in the engine shop, they sat down with an engine and all the technology they had and went through and developed the engine just through pure efficiency, to get the engine from 570 horsepower back to 650 with the boost control valve on the thing. So, like I said, the competency of the people within Gibson Motorsport at that time was truly amazing.
And it harks back to what we were talking with the team principals before. If you hand a constraint to anyone in motorsport, especially engineering, mechanical, and you say, no, this is all you can have, they go for 24 hours after that, they're like, oh, no, the world's over, that's it, we're never going to win again. And then they find the solution to make sure they'll win.
Look, it's all about, you get the rule book, so you sit down and you read it and read it and read it. Then you look at where you can expand on what they have given you to do. So there's always massaging of the rules or manipulating or whatever you like to call it. But yes, look, we used to do things. I mean, a classic example is the brake ducts on the front of this car. We put them on there and said, righto, and I sent a photograph to Japan and said, put this in the documentation, which they did. And really, they're probably a bit bigger than they should be, but we got away with it. And that's what it's all about. You know? And I guess the best people in the world for doing that sort of stuff is the NASCAR guys. They are unbelievable at what they'll do. And just recently, one of the drivers got a $10,000 fine because he actually had his gloves webbed between the fingers, because when he put it out the side of the car, it gave them a little bit more aerodynamic ability. And that's the sort of thing they go through. Well, I mean, we did a similar thing, but not quite to that extent. But there was a lot of things that you change around because the rules say this, but you interpret it as that. So you do that until somebody says you can't.
Yeah, maybe we should have asked Gunther that question as well. What gaps have you found in a certain ops manual that you'd like to manipulate? That's motorsport, right?
That's right.
It absolutely is. Oh, I think that's fantastic. Now let's talk a little bit more about you, because you've had a hand in so much development within Nissan Motorsport, and it stretches not only from sort of sports cars, there's Nissan and the 24 Le Mans. So yeah, talk to us a bit about your history and Nissan and why it's important to you to be a part of it.
Well, look, I mean, to say that I've been fortunate with what I've done in my life. I mean, this is my 40th year as a person that's paid in motorsport, and that's really, I mean, exceptional, really. But look, I started with Nissan, I don't know how many years ago, but a lot of years ago. I started in motorsport at home here in Australia. And then I had a guy that wanted to go to England and run some rally cars over there, so I went over with him, and after doing about 13 trips in 1 year, I said, I'm either going to stay here or go and live there. So we finished up going to live there. And then I got involved with Nissan, who were trying to establish an operation in Europe somewhere where they could run an international formula, which was the prototype car. So we set up a place in Milton Keynes with a gentleman called Howard Marsden, who a lot of you may have heard of. He was very big here with Ford Motor Company in the GDA shows, and then he went to Nissan with their motorsport manager, and guys like George Fury that used to rally the Datsuns, and Howard took them into the touring cars with the Bluebirds, and also he had Fred Gibson Motorsport, who drove for him as well. And Fred eventually took over the Nissan operation because Howard was sort of too busy, but Howard got sent to England to find a location where we could set up an operation. Well, I just happened to bump into Howard, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing this, this and this. So I then went and worked for him to set up the organisation called Nissan Motorsport Europe, of which we did. And the first part of that was to run what they call the HR31 Nissan, which is the model before this car, in the European Touring Car Championship. So we did that in 1988, and the whole idea of that was to establish an operation where we could run a prototype, the Group C program. So, and meaning in that time, the Japanese were running their own prototype cars, and we would go to Le Mans and help them service their cars and fuel their cars and do all that sort of stuff. But in 1988, we did the touring cars, and in 1989, we built our first prototype car, which was a Lola chassis, a Nissan engine, and a Hewland gearbox and all that sort of thing. So we went to Le Mans with our own car, totally doing our own thing in 1988, and I think we went for about 4 or 5 hours before it blew up. It's one of those things. We had some drivers in the car that three drivers in each car, and we had 2 cars, and one of the drivers hated the place, hated the car, so he seemed to be the driver that blew the engine up for some unknown reason. But so that was 1980, 89, and then 1990 we actually built a new car, again a Lola-based chassis. Engine was from Nissan. We developed the engine ourselves in-house. And in January of 1990, I actually brought the team out to Phillip Island, and we hired Phillip Island for 10 days to run the car. And we brought out 25 guys, 6 tonne of spares and a chassis, and spent 10 days there running around Phillip Island. And for those that know the lap times of Phillip Island, the best lap time we could do around there was a 1:18.2. And anybody I don't know if anybody's ever done it at 1:21, but so that was it. But we would come down the main straight at Phillip Island, and we had a tripod radar gun set up under the bridge, if you know Phillip Island, and we would go through there at 220 miles an hour. So it was a fairly efficient bit of car. But in the Mulsanne in 89, before they put the Mulsanne chicanes in, we would do 245, 247 miles an hour every lap. So miles an hour, not kilometres an hour, miles an hour. So, but it was a fuel economy formula, and it took us a long time to get on top of that. But yeah, so 1990, we went Le Mans again with 2 new cars, and we got pole position by 6 seconds, which was another interesting story. And I'll tell you that because basically we've got a mechanical boost control, which is controlled by solenoids, electric solenoids. Electric solenoids jammed, so the boost was not controlled, and it went through the roof. And we had a guy called Mark Brundle, driving the car at the time, and he did a lap time that was 6 seconds quicker than anybody else that was in the pit lane, and basically we reckon it had between 14 and 1500 horsepower because it had no boost control, so it was, and the engine was fine. So.
God bless those jammed solenoids, eh?
That's right, yeah. So that was.
If you wanted something to go wrong on a car and actually give you more power, that's what you want to happen, isn't it?
I mean, when the car came into pit lane, the scrutineers were all over it, and I said to Mark, I said, "How was all that?" And he just looked at me. He said, "That was mega." It's all he could say was mega.
Well, fantastic. Well, yeah. I could listen to you speak about the glory days of Nissan and motorsport in this country, and 1991, 1992 for absolute hours. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Alan Heaphy.